They thought I was the quiet failure, easy to control, easy to dismiss. They didn't know I was the one pulling every string on a stage they didn't even realize they were performing on. It started, as most disasters do, innocuously enough. A simple phone call last month, an invitation to my parents, Robert and Susan Miller's annual summer garden party. An event I usually found excuses to skip. Forced smiles, polite conversation, and the inevitable agonizing comparisons to my older brother. Ethan will be there, Mom had chirped, that familiar lilt in her voice that always signaled impending Ethan worship. He has some exciting news. You should really talk to him, Sophia. Maybe he can offer some perspective on your career path. Ethan, the golden boy, the star of the family narrative, always successful, always praised, always held up as the standard I could never reach. Me? I was just Sophia Miller, the one who chose that confusing tech stuff over real business, the one who preferred coding in her room to networking at Dad's country club. From the moment we were kids, the script was written. Ethan was the natural leader, the charmer, the one destined for greatness in the respectable world of finance. He breezed through college on Dad's generous tuition, checks and connections, landing a coveted analyst position right after graduation. Meanwhile, my path was different. Need-based scholarships, student loans, and working 3 different part-time jobs. Tutoring calculus, building websites for local businesses, graveyard shifts at a campus lab, just to afford ramen and textbooks, while I put myself through the state university's engineering program. Ethan's just naturally gifted with people, Dad would say with a proud smile. You have to work harder, Sophia. Network more. Be more like your brother. It wasn't just about the effort. It was about my inherent worth, or lack thereof, in their eyes. My academic achievements were dismissed as niche or impractical. His lowest B in an economics class was debated as a fluke. My small coding projects were cute hobbies. His entry-level job in a large firm was a cornerstone of his burgeoning empire. While Ethan was celebrated at every family dinner, every holiday gathering, every achievement, no matter how minor, plastered on the family fridge, I was quietly building something nobody, especially them, knew about. After college, I didn't just get a standard tech job. I took the most challenging, lowest-paying engineering role I could find, the one that offered access to cutting-edge infrastructure and demanding real-world problems. Every spare dollar, every exhausted late night, every ounce of mental energy went into bootstrapping my own small firm, Nexus Innovations. It wasn't glamorous. We started out tackling complex back-end systems, building robust data architecture for clients nobody had heard of. My family just assumed I was still that mid-level coder somewhere, probably struggling, barely making ends meet. I let them. It was easier than trying to explain, trying to articulate a vision they wouldn't understand, trying to gain a crumb of approval that would never come anyway. The silence became my shield, and eventually, my strategy. Nexus Innovations grew, not with splashy press releases or venture capital fireworks, but steadily, organically, fueled by results and reputation among a niche clientele. We landed increasingly major contracts. I hired a small team of brilliant, dedicated people who believed in the quiet power of foundational technology. And 2 years ago, we made a strategic move that would intersect directly with my family's narrative. We quietly acquired Ether Corp, a well-known, albeit struggling, tech consulting firm in the city. The acquisition was complex, shrouded in layers of shell corporations and holding trusts, designed specifically for discretion. It just so happened that Ethan, the golden boy, had become a rising star at Ether Corp, a senior partner, well-respected, and utterly oblivious that his ultimate boss was the sister he consistently underestimated. The summer party wasn't just an invitation. It was a carefully laid trap, although I didn't fully grasp the extent until later. I arrived at their sprawling suburban home, feeling that familiar knot of tension in my stomach. Ethan, looking every bit the successful financier, in a tailored Italian suit, greeted me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was the same smug look he'd perfected in childhood, whenever he'd won a game he'd secretly cheated at. "Sophia, still coding away?" he asked, his voice carrying just loud enough for the small group of family, friends, and acquaintances nearby to hear. "Heard things are stable. Good for you, finding your niche." The subtle condescension, the implication that stable was the best I could hope for, that my work was a niche hobby compared to his real career. It was a familiar sting later, after dinner, while everyone was mingling with dessert and coffee. Dad cleared his throat, signaling for attention. "Some important family business," he announced, drawing the scattered guests closer. "As many of you know, the family trust, a modest fund set up by my grandmother years ago, barely enough to buy a luxury car but weighted with symbolic importance, is being restructured. Given Sophia's, shall we say, less conventional and somewhat unpredictable career path." He hesitated, casting a pointed look at me, then glancing almost imperceptibly at Ethan, who offered a small, reassuring nod. "We've decided it's best that Ethan manages the funds. His proven track record in finance makes him the obvious choice to ensure it's invested wisely for the family's future." It wasn't about the money. It was about the public declaration of my perceived failure, the confirmation that I wasn't trusted, not even with a small inheritance intended for both of us. It was proof they still saw me as unreliable, incapable, needing supervision. My stomach twisted, a familiar ache of inadequacy blooming in my chest. The years of being overlooked, the constant comparisons, the quiet dismissal of my efforts, the loud praise for his minimal ones, it all boiled up, hot and bitter. Then, Ethan, ever the opportunist, added his cruel twist. "And speaking of careers," he said smoothly, turning to a few of his senior colleagues from EtherCorp who were guests at the party, likely introduced by Dad for networking purposes. "I've been helping Mom and Dad look out for Sophia. She's in a demanding field, needs some guidance. I even had a casual chat with someone at her company." He smirked, a chilling glint in his eye. "Just to see how she's doing. Seems like she's having some trouble with project deadlines, falling a bit behind." My blood ran cold. This wasn't just passive dismissal. This was active sabotage. He hadn't just relegated me to the role of the struggling sister. He was actively trying to damage my reputation, possibly even planting seeds of doubt with industry contacts, hoping to cost me the job they thought I had. He was using his position at EtherCorp, leveraging connections within my own company, to undermine my life, utterly unaware that EtherCorp was not just my company, but that the people he'd spoken to were reporting his inquiries directly back to me. The sheer arrogance, the casual cruelty, the breathtaking assumption of his inherent superiority and my inferiority. It was a low, vicious blow. My parents, completely blind to the malice, just smiled and nodded, proud of their golden son, for helping his poor, struggling sister. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like a raw nerve. The victim narrative they'd meticulously written for me over 2 decades, the one I'd quietly endured, felt suffocating, humiliating. But in that precise moment, standing there in their manicured garden, surrounded by people who saw me only through the lens of their dismissal, something fundamental shifted. The victim stopped being just a passive recipient of their cruelty and became a witness. I saw their plan in stark, ugly clarity. They weren't just restructuring a trust. They were performing an exorcism of my potential, publicly confirming their narrative of my failure, and Ethan was actively trying to burn down the ghost of a career they thought I had, using the very resources I controlled. "Trouble with project deadlines, Ethan?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm, cutting through the light post-dinner chatter. "At which company are you hearing this information?" He laughed, a short dismissive sound, waving a hand. "Oh, you know, the one you work at. Does it really matter? All those tech startups are the same." High pressure, unstable. The tech world is just tough. It matters, Ethan, I said, my voice gaining strength as I stood up straighter. The nearby conversations tapered off. All eyes were turning towards our little tableau, expecting the usual outcome. Me, awkward and silent, or offering a weak defensive excuse. I gave them neither. Because Ethan, I looked him dead in the eye, letting the full weight of the moment land. You've been getting your information about my trouble from people who report directly to me. Confusion flickered across his face, quickly followed by outright disbelief. His smile vanished. What are you talking about, Sophia? I'm not just coding away at some unnamed struggling company, I stated, my voice clear and ringing with a newfound authority. I own Nexus Innovations, and 2 years ago, Nexus Innovations completed a quiet acquisition of EtherCorp. Silence fell like a physical weight. My parents looked like they'd just watched their carefully constructed world shatter into a million pieces. Mom gasped, covering her mouth. Dad's face drained of color. Ethan's jaw went slack, his eyes wide, with stunned horror. His colleagues from EtherCorp standing nearby stared at him, then back at me, dawning, terrifying realization spreading across their faces. The senior partner they respected, the man who had been subtly probing about one of their distant colleagues, had just been revealed to be completely clueless about the ownership of their own firm. And that distant colleague was their ultimate. Boss, you own Ether? Ethan stammered, the words catching in his throat. That's impossible. You don't have that kind of money. You're just Sophia? I finished for him, echoing his earlier words, letting them hang in the air between us. Yes, just Sophia, who worked 3 jobs through college, built a company from scratch with no handouts, and acquired a firm valued at 8 figures while you were busy being the golden boy, playing politics. I turned slightly towards his stunned colleagues. I hope Ethan wasn't using company resources or leveraging his position to check up on his struggling sister and spread inaccurate information, because that would be a serious breach of conduct, something the owner of EtherCorp would have to address quite severely. Ethan was utterly speechless, trapped in the glare of the truth, exposed in his own lie, in his own company, which was no longer his in any meaningful way, but my company. My parents, recovering slightly from their shock, began to sputter protests about family, about loyalty, about misunderstanding. Family, I repeated, the word a shard of glass in my mouth. Family doesn't dismiss you for 20 years. Family doesn't try to cut you out of a pittance inheritance while sitting on considerable wealth themselves. Family doesn't actively sabotage your career behind your back, whispering lies to your colleagues, hoping you fail, just because they can't stand to see you succeed. The victim had finally found her voice, and it was louder, stronger, and infinitely more powerful than they had ever imagined. I wasn't just speaking to them. I was speaking to the years of silent pain, the years of being diminished. The party dissolved into chaos. Ethan, his reputation among his EtherCorp colleagues shattered, faced immediate repercussions, starting with an internal investigation initiated by my directive to the Ether executive team. My parents, their social standing, among their friends suddenly precarious as the whispers began, called repeatedly over the next few days, first with anger and disbelief, then with weak, desperate attempts at reconciliation, suddenly very interested in the daughter who was not just successful, but significantly more successful than their golden son. I didn't take the trust money. I instructed the lawyers overseeing the restructuring to donate my half to the State University's Engineering Scholarship Fund. I didn't forgive them. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The scars of being the underestimated one, the dismissed one, the one they tried so hard to bury under their own narrative of my failure, ran too deep for easy healing. Now, weeks later, I sit in my executive office at Nexus Innovations, which is now also effectively my executive office overlooking the main floor of EtherCorp. Sometimes, I look out the window at the city skyline and remember that quiet girl who felt invisible, who wrote code in her dorm room while her brother was at parties, who ate ramen while he dined out. They tried to write my story as a tragedy of unrealized potential, a narrative of failure and inadequacy. But I took the pen back at that party. And the plot twist? The part where the quiet failure turned out to be the one in control all along? That was all me. They wanted me to be the victim, needing their help, dependent on their approval. I ended up being the victor, needing neither. It's a quiet victory, built not on their belated approval or the surprised awe of others, but on my own resilience, my hard work, and my belief in myself when no one else did. And that, I've learned, is the most unstoppable, unshakable success of all. They thought they knew me. They were wrong. And sometimes, being utterly underestimated is the greatest power you can possess, JPG.